A very good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this discussion on transparency and traceability in global value chains. I'm Nancy Kachingira from BBC News, and it's a great pleasure to be your moderator for this conversation. Supply chains can no longer hide in the shadows. For decades, we purchased products without necessarily knowing where they came from or what the impact of their production was. But that is an era that is now ending. And that end is being brought about by a combination of forces. We can think about consumer demand for ethical products. We can also think about investors who want to understand risk better. Of course, there is also the fact that some regulations are now mandatory rather than voluntary. So these are coming together to create a shift. And the question becomes not whether transparency is here to stay, but how we can harness technology and financial mechanisms to create sustainable value chains that are ethical and that are resilient. To have this discussion, I'm joined by a wonderful panel who I'll now introduce. Maria Teresa Pisani is Chief Ad Interim of the Trade Facilitation Section in the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division at UNECE. She brings crucial insights on policy frameworks and international standards that enable the traceability that we're talking about across borders. We also have with us at the very end there, Paulo Monaco, who serves as Director of Financial Products for SME Finance and Development here at EBRD, where he develops innovative financial solutions that incentivize supply chain sustainability and transparency. Also joining us today is Sandra Nolasco, who is CEO and co-founder of Twinco Capital, a fintech pioneering a fundamentally different approach to supply chain finance. Now, while most may focus narrowly on invoice discounting, Twinco is, I think I'm right, the only company that's funding the entire production cycle from purchase, order, right to final invoice. And her work bridges sustainability commitments with financial incentives. And making up our panel is Elif Kam, who leads global sourcing, sustainability, and CSR at De Facto, which is a major fashion retailer, transforming its supply chain through enhanced traceability. Her experience offers a practical corporate perspective today on implementation challenges and the opportunities as well. And of course, we look forward to hearing from you in the room. We're not going to leave it to the end, though. We'll actually kick off with a question to you. And it's right on our screen. We'd like you to participate in a little poll here. The question is, what are the biggest barriers for transparency and traceability in global value chains? And we'd like you to participate in this poll. There will shortly on the screen appear a QR code which you can scan. There'll be some multiple choice answers. You can pick one. And we won't reveal the answers straight away, but we'll come back to this question at the end, just so we can have a reflection, see what we thought at the beginning and what we think at the end. So if you can take part in that poll, that would be wonderful. It's a great way for us to hear from you in the room as we begin our discussion. And the options that you will see in that poll, remember the question is what you believe is the biggest barrier to implementing this transparency. You'll see options like costed resource constraints, technical complexity and lack of standardization, limited cooperation across borders, regulatory uncertainty and fragmentation, and also consumer demand not being strong enough yet. So if you can take part in that poll, that will be really helpful. We look forward to hearing your responses. So as we begin, we're considering the complexity of modern value chains. And Maria Teresa, if we can start with you. Regulators, we've seen, are increasingly tightening compliance frameworks. This is because they want to ensure sustainable and transparent supply chains. But I wonder, because you have sight of this, what are the key requests that are coming from regulators, and what are also the critical policy challenges that need to be tackled in order to have this implemented across value chains?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nancy. Pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon, and EBRD for the invitation. Now on your question, the key requests from regulators when it comes to traceability and transparency of value chains. I would say the request is there for sustainability claims on products and for sustainable corporate disclosures of companies to be reliable and verifiable. And this is actually critical to foster responsible choices for both consumers and producers. In fact, you can verify, you can improve what you know, and you can measure. And that is why traceability and transparency are really at the core of this, let's say, acceleration in regulatory action. They are indeed a key enabler. So not an option anymore, but really a critical step. Now, there are
Can I just ask you perhaps to break down for those of us in the room who may not be as savvy, what exactly that means in terms of why are regulators asking for this? What is the drive pushing this?
Well, as I said, making sure that a claim on a product placed on market or corporate sustainability disclosure by companies are verifiable and reliable, that we really know for a product where it comes from, how it is made, whether it is compliant with environmental, social, governance standards all along the value chain, from the raw material sourcing, processing to the branding, retailing, and placing product on the market. That's because greenwashing is a big issue. If you don't have, claims that can be trusted and are reliable, incentives to go for sustainable performance are actually not there. We need to make sure that those investing and paying the cost of doing sustainability, because this comes at a cost, they are paid back for that effort, and they have the right incentives. Now, what is interesting is to see, so that's why this is really at the core of the regulatory development we are witnessing in many jurisdictions, with the European Union at the forefront. Over the last 2 years, we have been witnessing really an acceleration in the regulatory production, the eco-design regulation that is making mandatory the use of digital product passports for products placed on market starting from 2026, the Green Claims Directive, the Due Diligence Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Directive, so a number of regulatory instruments that are really introducing mandatory requirements for companies operating and their whole value chain. And this is the case for the European Union. Not only China, the United States, Canada, Australia, the UK are moving in the same direction.
So is it fair to say that this is a future certainty, that this will be a requirement pretty much across the board?
Absolutely so. And I think that responds also to a demand from the industry to have clear rules of the game and regulatory certainty. The challenge there and the risk is regulatory fragmentation, that different jurisdictions will move in directions that are not necessarily aligned. So the need to, let's say, overcome and to bring harmonization and alignment is very, very strong. That's why global initiative, global platform play such an important role to have there the necessary harmonization and alignment. The other, from the UN perspective, challenge that we see is for SMEs and actors operating in emerging economies. There is definitely a capacity gap. There is definitely a lack of understanding of what are the implications of this regulatory demand. A lot of the companies do not know how to prepare, to meet the requirements for informing digital product passports, for instance. So there is a need to build that capacity, and these are skill sets costs within the companies, but also the IT infrastructure will be very important to develop in order to have the companies ready to do that traceability and transparency that is demanded for the value chains. And there, I think the supply chain finance and institutions like EBRD play a very important role, because there is the need to close that gap and fill that gap and ensure that companies get capacity building, get trained, but also get the
And if I may, I'd like
finance.
to actually bring Paulo in on that point in terms of what gap is being filled, because I think, as Maria Teresa has pointed out, this is quite complex. It involves potential for fragmentation across different countries. If you think of a simple jacket, fabric from Bangladesh, buttons from China, assembled in Vietnam, there's a whole lot of complexity there. So how, or perhaps what are the key challenges that you observe from buyers and suppliers in some of the countries that the EBRD is working in around this issue?
Thank you, Nancy. I was told that the mic was an intelligent mic, and indeed I confirm, understands when the speaker is here. So you're thinking about jeans. I was even thinking about tomatoes, and even the tomato bit is quite difficult in terms of traceability.
How is a tomato difficult? It's
well,
a tomato.
Where did the seed come from? Huh?
Oh.
But when it comes to our countries of operations and suppliers and buyers, so obviously I do love our countries of operations, but they are perhaps not renowned for being the most strict or the most advanced in terms of regulations on sustainability and traceability. And even when they are, the enforceability of those regulations may not be, let's say, the most draconian one. Which means then that you need to separate between buyers and suppliers that are either trading locally and therefore only really subject to local pressure that I just described, or when they are trading with the outside. And particularly I'm thinking about the Nordics, and particularly I'm thinking about the EU, but also other standards that are emerging in other nations. Now, when that happens, then obviously it is more important for them, because it's more important for the people that buy their products. In general, this whole thing does revolve around money and interest. Of course, there are many companies that want to do good, and not denying that, and we work with many, and it's great. But there is an extra cost for that, and the question is whether that extra cost warrants an increase in their market share and bigger revenues and good ability to develop their brand names.
Mm-hmm. I love this, because you're all just asking each other the right questions. I think that's a good question for Sandra. In terms of financial incentives, what is the perspective here from investors?
Yes, well, when I hear about this dilemma between doing good and the cost that has, I think that we are fortunate to be exactly on the spot where actually they work together. So the fact that Trinco is doing supply chain finance from the purchase order all the way to final invoice payment. So we are actually providing the funding to the suppliers at the moment that they receive the purchase order, and exactly at the moment that they need to decide when they're going to buy the raw materials, when they're going to, what kind of raw materials are they buying, what kind of production processes they're using, etc.
Can you explain why it's significant to be involved in the whole process?
Yes. Well, normally, if you, we are very much focused on the apparel industry. I always think it's very easy for everybody with an example. If you have a company like De Facto, for example, and when they issue a purchase order to, say, a company in Egypt or in Turkey, or in Bangladesh, the supplier receives $100,000 worth of a purchase order that they need to produce and deliver. And before Trinco, all of the funding that they need to use to buy the raw materials, do the production, etc., need to be achieved from local banks with a lot of guarantees, caps, etc. But especially if you are a small and medium-sized company, the local bank will be looking at your credit risk. So how big is your balance sheet, right? And then when they deliver, eventually they can, and they have an invoice they can potentially go to traditional supply chain finance providers, the banks, and discount that invoice. But that's already at the tail end of the production cycle. Now, what Twinco does is that it looks at the performance, so not so much the size of the balance sheet, but we look at how well does this supplier delivers T-shirts, whether they are 5 T-shirts or 1 million T-shirts. And if you're doing that well, we are providing you the liquidity to produce, and then de facto will pay us on invoice due date. So we advance that liquidity. And the fact that we're looking at how well you do the T-shirts, that means that we're looking precisely at things like how well and how efficient are you in your water recycling process? How do you use your energy? What kind of raw materials you're using? So we have very much aligned incentive to look at how well you perform and to provide you funding, the better you perform. So the better you perform, the better the conditions of the financing that we are providing.
So how do you make the argument for the ethics of sustainability, of human rights, from a financial point of view?
Well, for us, it's actually very clear. It's well, it is mathematical, really. So let's talk about the S, right? A lot of people talk about climate change, etc., but the S, social aspects, are a very important aspect. One of the biggest causes of delays in the factories is absenteeism. So one of the biggest factors that affect your performance to deliver the T-shirt on time and with the quality that you have is absenteeism. So effectively, if you have a relevant, a proper social programs in your factories, if you're paying a certain amount of time, and if you have a competitive advantage, you are actually immediately decreasing the absenteeism that you have, and you're actually making sure that you have a more competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. Now, there are many things that we pilot and that you need to prove statistically, and that we're working on it constantly. But from a financial perspective, we can already see that better performance in certain aspects actually mean that you are delivering the T-shirts. And if you are delivering the T-shirts, our risk as a funder is lower, and therefore we can provide you better conditions, not because we are providing you a subsidy, but because actually our profit adapted to the risk is actually as good in that perspective. So you're effectively reducing the risk. And that's actually one of the major aspects of traceability. And when you talk about it, of course, I do think that regulation kind of helps focus people in a certain way. But actually, more than a compliance tool for us is an opportunity. Because the more transparency you do have, the better I can actually assess the risk, and therefore I can also provide you better conditions on a sustainable way in terms of sustainable along the time.
Oh, that's a really interesting perspective. And yes, Paulo, would you like to respond to that?
Just wanted to not interrupt, but complement, because at the beginning, Nancy, you asked about the perspective of investors. And I think it's important that we break down that category a little bit, because it is a very heterogeneous bunch, and depending on the subgroup, the behavior in respect of how important traceability of supply chain is for them is different, right? So we start from the very wealthy individual. Those are investors. They respond only to themselves, sometimes to their sons and daughters, but only later in life. You've got the family office, responds to the family. You have the hedge funds, they respond to their LPs, so the group is getting bigger. And then you get to pension funds, and you get to asset managers, and they have many more shareholders, they have many more people that are asking for their services. And I don't mean to be cynical, but the level of care and the level of attention that they have towards financing certain supply chains or understanding better what they're actually financing is really not just, but also a function of their disclosure requirements. If you don't see, you almost can do anything. And then it also depends on the pressure that their investors or their consumers, depending, sometimes both, is exerting on them. So that investor universe, I think, deserves to be broken down a little bit.
Okay. Now that's a helpful clarification. But if I can come to you, Elif, because as someone who we could say is at the coalface of all this, how are you as a company thinking about this issue? Because, Sandra mentioned, when looking at a company that's delivering the Gs, you would be that company. So what does sustainability mean to you and in relation to transparency and traceability?
Thank you very much. At De Facto, we don't see sustainability as a project. We see it as a leadership approach embedded across our entire value chain. Our vision is to evolve from fast fashion to responsible fashion, where growth is driven not just by speed, by ethics, traceability, climate responsibility. That's why we are focusing on three pillars, strategic pillars. First one is climate action. We are the first brand in Turkey. SBTi approved our Scope 1, 2, and 3 targets. We are proud of this. And the second one is social responsibility, because as Sandra told us, the ensuring fair labor practices, human rights compliance, and measurable steps are very important for us. And the latest one is sustainable products. So we are focusing on circular design and the material traceability, and the product durability also is very important for us. Our suppliers are not just implementers, but as strategic partners in transformation. So all these fundings and the supports are very important for us, because for us, sustainability is not just about reducing risks. It's about building a system that's transparent, inclusive, and future-ready.
And what does a transparent system do specifically for you as a business?
Transparency may often seem like a reporting issue from the outside, but in reality, it represents a deep transformation in how a company functions. At De Facto, we aim to go beyond product quality, as Sandra also told about this, and ensure that where, how, and under what conditions our products are made is fully visible. Today, we conduct internal and third-party audits to our main suppliers, tier ones, report carbon footprints at the product level, and collect verifiable environmental data. But transparency doesn't stop here. The real change is extending this visibility to down to fabric mills, dye houses, and raw material resources.
And have you expanded that traceability down to the raw materials yet, or is that an area that is still challenging?
Still challenging, and we have plans on it. We are, as I told you, now we are totally make our audits in the tier 1 suppliers, but we have to go deep dive to the tier 2, 3, 4.
Which is what we're touching on here, isn't it? The fact that there are areas of progress, but there are still some challenges, and I think you've all done a great job of highlighting what some of those challenges are. But I think in the next little bit, we're going to shift to what are some of the solutions that are available, the technology, and just to sort of palate cleanse ourselves from the challenge, we've got a small visualization that takes us into the universe of solutions. So we'll leave this up there. It gives us a good framework for thinking about what the future could look like and what the interventions are that could make a difference with the kind of challenges we've been discussing here. Just to remind you that you can still take part in that poll. If maybe you've changed your mind after we've been speaking to our panelists here, but you can just go onto the Slido app and answer that if you haven't already. But moving on to what we see in front of us when we talk about solutions. Maria Teresa, you touched on this a little bit, but the idea of digital passports is an interesting one. Could you just break that down for us in terms of the transformative potential there? What is that trying to achieve?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Digital
Your microphone?
Yes,
yeah.
digital passports are basically data carriers placed for products placed on markets that inform consumers about the product performance and the sustainability performance of that product. Now, at UNEC, for the past years, we have been mainly working on standardizing the data exchange business to business all along the value chain, from the raw material sourcing through the processing, finishing, and then the branding and retailing. So it's
you'll forgive me because I like to understand things in quite a simple manner. So in the real world, in the wild, how would I, as a consumer, interact with a digital product passport?
It's basically using your phone to scan a data carrier that can be a barcode or QR code on a product, and then on your phone, you will get data about that product, where it has been made,
so
how it has been
this was farmed, where it was grown.
Exactly.
How many countries it's passed through till it got to me.
Whether it complies with, or, it's made of cotton, for instance, that is not produced using child labor or forced labor, where exactly this has been done, or, made of leather that is deforestation risk-free. So this is the type of information that you would get through a digital product passport. But as I said, traceability so far has been basically standardizing the data collection and exchange business to business along the value chain. Now, what the missing link and what in the gap that needs to be addressed right now is how we connect this traceability and data exchange business to business to the business to consumers piece, so that the data collected and flowing along the value chain, they inform and they are uploaded on the digital product passport that consumers will scan to get product information. The other important piece of data exchange that is linked to the digital product passport is how data are then collected by regulatory authorities like customs or market surveillance authorities, because for products entering in a market, for instance, the European Union, these kind of regulatory agencies will need to verify whether those data are reliable and there are, verifiable credentials are attached to it. Mm-hmm. So the scalability that is really at the core of the effort now is to ensure that the business to business, business to consumers, business to government data exchange are coming together.
And is there a timeline for that?
Well, let's say the European Union certainly is the most advanced region or jurisdiction in terms of introduction of the digital product passport. The eco-design regulation mandates the use of digital product passports on products placed on the European markets by 2026 for certain priority categories. Batteries and textiles are certainly the first two ones. The European Union has requested the European standard setting body, the CEN-CENELEC, to standardize the digital product passport for the European Union, and certain agencies to standardize the data that will be uploaded on the digital product passport. But there are other jurisdictions, China, the United States, Canada, that are UK, are also standardizing digital product passports. So from that perspective, it's very, again, important to have global standardization initiative that at least identifies common requirements and principles for all these digital passports. There will be suppliers in Egypt or suppliers in Brazil that will have to provide data for DPPs on sneakers or T-shirts that will be, sold in Europe or the United States. We need to make sure that the data that they will provide will work for the DPPs in the United States, in the European Union, in China. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to have this harmonization, alignment of the...
But I think what you've said there underscores the fact that this is happening, this is here, it's not something that's coming. And I wonder, Paulo, in that context of something that is already happening, how does this affect the funding models? And how is the EBRD developing tools that can support the traceability and integration of value chains?
Thank you. I mean, in general, I think everyone now, and even before this panel, but everyone in the room understands that this is a very complicated topic that we're discussing. I'd say that without AI, it probably take us 20 years. But I think thanks to what we got a couple of years ago, this will be a very accelerated journey. I mean, regardless of the final timing of regulations and, final product where you can understand with a strong degree of certainty the traceability of your product, for us, for EBRD and, for other international financial institutions, what is important is that this thing is in the air, okay? So we don't know exactly when it will become actionable, but we're not talking about 50 years from now. And our role here is a role of not making a market, not changing people's behavior completely, but it's the role of preparing people for change. It's a role of explaining why being an early mover is actually good for their business. Whether we do that through education, whether we do that through courses, whether we do that through mentoring, whether we do that through financial incentivization, we probably do all of them depending on the situation. But it's a gentle push or a gentle nudge in the right direction. Sometimes it's not so gentle, but yeah. But this our clients will tell us. But no need to nudge you because you already moved. So
Leaf seems to agree that it's not very gentle.
That's fine. Creates a good brand name. Now, when it comes to the financial products, obviously here, I mean, there's so many financial products, but the condition that is needed for this, the sine qua non, so to say, is that we need to be able to identify who are the buyers, who are the suppliers. If you're giving money and you don't know exactly what you're funding, where you're funding, who you're funding, then there's very little traceability and sustainability that you can ask the other parties to do because you can't even trace your own money, right? And so we're talking about solutions. I mean, I'll mention a few, but, for the past 20 years, EBRD had developed this really sort of large, it's called the Trade Facilitation Program, where the importers, the exporters, what they import, what they export. And more recently, we developed another framework complementary to this one, which is focused on supply chain financing. We'll add other products. Together with Twinkle, we're definitely adding purchase order financing, which is just a step before, accounts receivable purchases, anything where you can trace who's buying, who's selling what, in which quantity, and from which countries. And now, what we do is we layer onto that an element of outcome linked to ESG standards. Therefore, this is the price that you're going to pay, but if you reach this milestone, you're going to pay a bit less. Or if you don't reach it, you're going to pay a little more. And so this is a basic system of incentivization. As financier, our job is to give money and possibly get it back and give it away again. So this is the one method that we have. But we also work with suppliers, and particularly we focus on smaller companies. We focus on emerging markets where as I said before at the beginning, the traceability is a bit less. A sustainability aspect is also sometimes a little bit overlooked. In order to work with them and provide through consultancy, through third-party consultants, through knowledge and through other means, to add to their ability to be able to become more sustainable businesses and to improve their traceability practices. So this is the tools that we utilize: incentivization and non-financial services, particularly to SMEs.
That's really interesting. And Sandra, because you were talking earlier, of course, about the fact that you're doing some data-driven financing, really, if I can call it that. You're looking very closely at how companies perform, and you need data for that. Just talk to us about, or maybe illustrate for us, how this data actually ends up facilitating financial inclusion for suppliers.
Yes. Well, first of all, indeed, this is a very complex problem, and as you say, without AI, I'm very happy that somebody is looking at, a regulatory framework for us, and I'm very happy I don't have to do that because I find it very, very difficult. And so one of the things when we look at actually collecting data, we are strong believers that you can only really succeed if people are not filling in that data for the purpose of compliance. I think it's very complicated to really manage to get reliability over time on the information that you get. If you're
so
just
why are they? What's a good reason for them to be filling in the data?
Well, we have a good example at Twinkle, right? So we get a lot of data from their shipping documents, for example. And we've developed specifically an AI tool that collects that information. They're just funding their transactions, so they're getting liquidity. This is a manager in an SME in Bangladesh or Egypt or Turkey, and they're really worried with managing their business, right? So they're getting liquidity, and because they're getting that liquidity through our platform, through our technology, they are uploading the shipping documents. In that shipping documents, there's a number of information, and on the purchase order data themselves, there's a number of information which is extremely useful, including the type of products, the weight of those products, etc. And then we collect the data. And one of the things, for example, that it's also very important for them and for us is where are these purchase orders once they are actually being produced? So are they on the boat? Are they stuck in the Red Sea at a certain stage? Are they going to be there on time? So we are tracking that route. Why? For a specific business reason. And what we've done is that, well, actually we have the weight, we have the type of product, we have where they are. So actually you can have a very clear calculation of their CO2 emissions, for example. And you can provide that data then. But this is just a very small example. But we are collecting data from a performance risk perspective, et cetera, and people are providing that not to fill in a formula specifically, but because this is their day-to-day operations. And the impact is incredible. We think that, of course, the SMEs are, well, we don't think, everybody here thinks that and knows that they are the motor of economic development. And we at Twinkle are strong believers that global trade is a lever for economic development. So by focusing on these type of data and being able to fund companies independently of whether they're big or small, you're actually doing the first thing, which is leveling the playing field for the SMEs. We always like to give an example. We have, for example, Mr. Azhar is a supplier from Bangladesh. He had about 10 years experience in the industry, and so he set up his own company in 2018. Because he had a lot of experience, he was already in 2 years he was already selling to Mango, Tandem, but then this growth started stalling. Why? Because he was an SME and he didn't have access to funding. So because we didn't have to look at their balance sheet, but we looked at how they were actually producing these T-shirts, we could fund them. And then he started growing exponentially. He started selling to other brands that are our customers with the liquidity that we were providing them. Because we continued funding that, he was funding 70% of his working capital with us. But what does that mean? That means that he was able to release his credit lines, so he got access to credit lines for long-term, for building his new factory.
And all this was then possible because you were able to look
at the
his
data.
business, at the data.
Exactly.
You
What
had
we're
the
looking at
transparency.
is what kind of purchase orders did he do? Did he deliver well, yes or no? Were there a lot of delays? Did his customers pay him, yes or no? Because effectively what we're doing is that as long as you deliver the T-shirt, the one who's paying me is your company, is companies like De facto. So you're actually focusing exactly, and everybody is then focused on how you produce better. And if we really believe, and we really do believe, that if you produce better, as in, with less water, less energy, and if you have a good working force, very efficient workforce, etc., you'll be a better producer.
That's a really interesting point you make about leveraging existing behavior to achieve these results rather than trying to create new behavior and new systems. But I just want to bring in Elif. Could you talk us through how you are using digital solutions? I mean, Paulo mentioned how without AI, some of this wouldn't really be possible now. Are you seeing new avenues in terms of digital solutions?
For the sustainability and the CSR side, we are on the planning phase right now. But I want to add something from my aspect to Sandra's conversation. Traceability and the transparency are very important. Why? Because when you see your production phase, it's very important. We lived COVID moments or many crises last 5 years. So at that time, if we see where is our product and what is happening, which phase in the production, so we can respond and act at that moment. This is very important. So loss of sales are our nightmares, as you know, because we have to give our products on time to our customers. So that's why our plan is to focus on three priorities, like QR-based product IDs to check where is the product, and the material traceability tools. This is very important to track the origin and processes, stage of fabrics, raw materials, etc. And the latest one is the carbon tracking system to measure environmental impact through the supply chain. So we are laying the foundation for long-term traceability that is measurable, inclusive, and actionable. So that's why we need digital providers, financial solutions, and trainings for suppliers are very important in this journey.
Well, let's go back a little bit. If you'll remember, we had that poll at the beginning that was talking about the barriers. I think we've heard a lot about not just the benefits of traceability and some success stories about what can happen, but let's just go back and look at the barriers and what you actually thought, what you identified as the biggest barriers to implementing transparency and traceability in global value chains. So this should be interesting. Okay, so we have at 47%, so most people in this room believe that technical complexity and a lack of standardization is the biggest barrier. And second to that, cost and resource constraints. Then limited cross-border cooperation, regulatory uncertainty. All those three are at the same level. So the only one most people seem to not think was a barrier was low consumer demand. So that's interesting that there's a recognition that, Paulo, you're shaking your head.
I completely disagree with everyone.
Please tell us why.
If the consumer wants, the consumer gets.
Well, I think people are saying here that they absolutely believe that people do want to know where things are coming from. That's why this isn't a barrier. But I'd be interested to hear very quickly from the panelists. No time to change your answer now that you know what the room thinks. But what would you have said?
I would have said the same.
The same?
It's not really lack of standardization.
Let's use the microphone, please. Yeah, thank you.
wouldn't say that much lack of standardization. There are perhaps too many standards, and that's the alignment and harmonization is very, very important, but the technical complexity definitely is there. So I would tend to agree.
So less lack of standardization and more harmonization of standards, you'd say?
I
for
would
that
say
one?
so.
Okay. And Sandra?
Well, I would have said cost and resource constraints, but basically very much linked to the complexity. What I do think is that the global supply chains today are so extremely complex that actually the resources and the cost that you have to put in to really have a reliable system of traceability are very complicated. And there I go a little bit in your face. So either you have a very strong economical incentive to do so, and then the consumer needs to pay for that. Wanting means, are you ready to pay for that? But either people have a very, very clear economic incentive to do that. Otherwise, the cost and the resources that you need to put into it are so big that...
Why are they so big? Silly
well,
question.
because simply because of the complexity of, even if you, let's say that you really want to do that.
And is this regional complexity? Is it what sort of complexity?
Well, what you were saying, right? Take a small jacket that you find there, and as you said, the raw materials will come from one country, the fabrics will come from another, will be produced in another, the buttons will be there. So even just from a management perspective, to get it all done and have your data properly organized and not in Excels everywhere, etc., it's already very difficult. You can imagine how complicated is that.
But understood. Okay.
If I add on what Sandra mentioned, the cost is also linked on to the proving of compliance with the standards. If you need to certify for your organic cotton or for complying with chemicals regulation or getting certification on deforestation risk, free production of leather, I mean, that comes at a cost. The cost is very high. And when it comes to the incentives, price premium is not yet there. And this is what we hear from the companies we engage with. They don't receive a price premium for the investment they put into improving the sustainability performance and certifying for that. But sometimes, more than the price premium, what companies would value are long-term business relationship, being sure that the moment they invest, they will have a client that will place the order for a certain amount of time with them, right? Because these are investments that are for some time. So
well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think Paulo will probably talk about this, but it's probably asking consumers to put their money where their mouth is. But I'll come to Elif first in terms of your response, in terms of what you would have picked.
We are a competitive brand globally, so that's why the prices are very important for us. So we should implement sustainability and traceability and transparency in a competitive way. This is very important. But I agree with the first answer, because the technical complexity, yes, now majority of the people or the leaders will learn this with the experiencing the process exactly. And also, as I'm buying from 11 countries right now, these are the main suppliers. When you check the subcontractors and the dyeing mills, etc., it will be huge amount of suppliers. So that means, how will the system speak to each other for the digital passport or something like that? So I think technical complexity is the first, but with a competitive price.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Paulo, we'll come to your dissenting view just now, but I just want to let you know that we do have time for at least one question from the room. So if you do have a question, you can put up your hand now. We'll get a microphone to you early and come to you after Paulo. But go ahead and give us your
Thank you.
take.
I thought maybe I wouldn't dissent anymore, and my fellow panelists convinced me, but I still dissent. I go back to your favorite topic of example of tomatoes, right? A simple tomato and the seed and the fertilizer and the whatever feed that you use to feed your tomatoes. You go into a supermarket and an organic tomato that you can trace exactly everything and would cost you, what, €3.50 per kilo? And then you buy the conventional tomato, you don't know where it comes from, what it is made of, and it costs you €1. And it is red, it is round, it's a tomato. It looks the same. It's unbranded, so brands maybe have a little bit of a difference. So I'm not saying it's easy to trace where, you know, products that are more complex than a tomato are coming from in their entirety is an easy process. Quite the contrary. I think it is very, very complicated. I think AI will help us analyze the big data. But the consumer is just simply not willing to pay the price. The consumer does not yet care enough to pay 200–300% more.
Do we agree in the room? Anybody disagree with that? No? Okay. So, well, that's interesting because in the poll, that wasn't necessarily picked up as one of the barriers.
I'm just very convincing.
Can I add you one
You're just
thing?
very convincing.
That's why the recycling materials are very important right now. That's why the circular producing, we need more to use again and again the materials. So it decreases the prices as well.
Right. Anyone in the room with a comment? Last chance? Yes? Oh, yes, we've got a hand here. Please, let's get your microphone and...
Well, thank you very much for this discussion. I'm among the 3% saying that it's the demand that drives everything. Because I'm not saying that the other challenges are not important, but it's only because there is a demand for that that's being built up. It's very slow, but that's only because of that. If we see historically, that companies started thinking about standardization, investing, and making sure that there is traceability. So I think that's really the incentive there.
Do you think the demand is going to grow?
I would hope so, but unfortunately, with the global situation right now, it may stabilize or even go down since people will have less purchasing power. So unfortunately, the necessity may actually force everybody to put their conviction on the side. I think that's what we see regularly, unfortunately. I had a question for the panelists. It's about where do you see a role for the civil society, for the business association in the countries, or even organizations like ILO? If we take, because we talked a lot about the ready-made garment value chain, and that's where you had the program for better factories in Bangladesh and Cambodia, in Vietnam. And that's so it was 15 years ago. That really helped create this incentive for companies there to improve their production, to pay attention to their social responsibilities, to help also ensure that their workforce was better off, and that's usually 90% women. So do you think that those are good partners for the private sector?
Yes.
I find it very interesting. I absolutely think that there's a role there. And I think there's a very good potential for collaboration. Specifically in Bangladesh, for example, we are actually piloting some programs where there's a local organization collecting data on the factories on health incidents. And on the basis of that data, they're getting the possibility of getting life insurance for the employees on those factories. And we are actually building that in and saying, hey, for those factories that we are funding, we will actually subsidize that on our own financing cost, so that we would pay for that insurance on the employees. And why? Because we want to show, that is not statistically proven, but we are firm believers of that actually those companies that will have that life insurance will have more competitive workforce, and therefore they will be able to produce better and have lower risk. So I do think that one of the ways of going about it in terms of the demand from the consumers, I think that if you're given the same price, every consumer would rather do good, right? If you have the same price. So you can either convince them to pay more for that, or you can work really hard in improving the efficiency of your supply chains, actually focusing on those aspects of sustainability that immediately bring you that kind of efficiency. And we do think that there's many aspects of sustainability that, if they're framed correctly, can actually improve your efficiency and provide you a better product and a competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's a strong point, and especially, I mean, if you consider the fact that every person in Europe produces 11 kilos of fashion waste a year, when we start to feel the effects of that in our lives and the environment, we might start to think differently about some of these things. We've only got a few minutes left, so you've each got a minute. I would like us to leave on that note of positivity, because there is a lot happening. There are a lot of examples of success and things moving in the right direction. I'll just give each of you a quick minute to say where you see the bright spots when it comes to this.
Well, I would say that with an increasing geopolitical complexity, with tariffs ramping up, and with this ESG demand that is bringing in complexity, traceability gives, the opportunity actually to, let's say, improve market access, improve access to finance and financial means, and to develop a more collaborative and constructive business relationship along the value chain. So definitely, actually, an opportunity.
Thank you. Sandra?
Well, for us, it's essential. It's always, again, a practical example. If you take, for example, last year's protests in Bangladesh, or indeed everything that is happening today, even in Pakistan and India, the fact that we had that data, that transactional data, allowed us to tell exactly both our customers and our investors and our customers, so customers, investors, and of course ourselves, where were those orders? Which ports did they have to reroute them from, which is very important. And effectively what it was the specific impact that it would have in each of these customers. That was for us very, very important. Traceability and transparency of data is an incredible competitive advantage in times of turbulence. So,
wonderful, thank you. Elif?
The most critical benefit of traceability is control through clarity. When we have full visibility of our orders, so we gain the ability to respond quickly and meaningfully to the risk. So this is a risk management issue, to get actions quickly, and how can we deliver our goods to customer fastly. This is the most important part.
Thank you. Paulo, lastly?
I'm not going to talk about tomatoes in my final minute. After you. But while this is no Rio conference 1991 and no time for big declarations, but I think in the panel we have everyone that we need in order to do something that will change those statistics a little bit, which is joint projects. We actually have everyone. We have 1 year to make this project, and Nancy will announce on BBC in a year's time if we
as long as you give me a tomato as a crop.
Even to an organic for you.
Wonderful, yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being such a wonderful audience today. Let's thank you to our panelists. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.